Under a sky swollen with rain, the prairie breathed in silence. The world felt hushed, as if holding its breath for something sacred to arrive. Out on the edge of Dust Hollow, a cabin leaned into the wind like it was listening for ghosts. That was where Bo Maddox, 30 years old and broad as an oak, lived in the company of tools and wind. Folks called him the giant cowboy, a man whose hands could tame horses yet never found a hand to hold. That night, the rain came down like a secret trying to be told. He sat by the fire, polishing a saddle that didn't need shining, when he heard it, laughter, light and human, carried by the storm. It wasn't the laughter of men. It trembled with fear, then softened into a whisper of hope. He rose, heart hitching like a startled colt. The sound led him to the barn. Lantern in hand, he opened the wooden door to find two shapes curled in the straw beside a pile of woven baskets. Their clothes were damp, their hair tangled with rain. One lifted her head first, Ayanna, 22, her eyes dark as wet soil, watching him with the stillness of a deer. The other, Nita, 23, braver by a breath, sat straighter and squared her shoulders like a mother shielding a child. "We didn't mean no harm," she said, voice trembling against the barn's hush. "The rain took us, and the road back's too dark." Bo didn't answer right away. The storm cracked, light spilling through the gaps in the wall, flashing across their faces, two strangers caught between shame and need. He set his lantern down, took off his hat, and left without a word. When he returned, he placed two folded blankets between them. "It's cold," he said, rough as gravel. Then he turned and walked back toward the cabin. When he closed the door behind him, he didn't know he'd just stepped into a story that would change his name forever. Morning rose slow and uncertain, the air thick with the smell of wet cedar. The women were gone from the barn when he checked, but their baskets remained, a quiet thank you in woven reed. By noon, the town already knew. Dust Hollow had a talent for stretching truths until they snapped. At the general store, whispers coiled like snakes. The giant's keeping them now. The preacher's wife called it shameful. The blacksmith smirked that he always suspected Bo liked his solitude for a reason. When Bo rode through town to buy feed, people turned away, their silence louder than any shout. He said nothing. He just filled his saddlebag and rode back home, the sun behind him and judgment before him. The second night, the rain returned, and so did they. Bo heard a soft knock on his door. Ayanna stood there, soaked again, Nita behind her holding the same baskets. "We can't stay in the barn," Ayanna whispered. "The roof's leaking through." Bo stepped aside without speaking. The cabin felt smaller with them inside, yet somehow warmer. He offered them seats near the fire, then busied himself pretending not to notice the steam rising from their clothes or how Nita's fingers trembled as she wrung her shawl. He fixed a pot of coffee and poured it into a tin cup. They thanked him quietly, each syllable fragile, uncertain. That night, he lay awake listening to their soft breathing across the room, wondering how something so gentle could cause such noise in his heart. The next morning, the sheriff came. He was polite, but his boots carried the weight of the town's suspicion. "Bo," he said, "you're a decent man, but this don't look right. 2 native girls under your roof? Folks are talkin'. You know how talk spreads." Bo stared past him to the hills. "Ain't done nothing wrong," he said. "They needed shelter." The sheriff sighed, tipping his hat. Sometimes right don't matter much when wrong's easier to believe. After he left, Bo stood a long time by the window, his reflection cut by raindrops. Behind him, Ayanna stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, almost questioning. He didn't turn, but he didn't pull away either. Outside, the wind sighed like it knew what it meant to be misunderstood. Days turned into a rhythm of small mercies. The rain finally eased, but the women stayed. They worked beside him as though they'd always belonged there. Ayanna mended his torn sleeve one afternoon, her fingers quick and sure. Nita hummed a song that made the horses stop flicking their tails to listen. Bo carved small wooden figures by the fire at night, 2 women and a horse, telling himself it was just to pass the time. He caught himself smiling more than he meant to. Still, every ride into town felt heavier. The stairs pressed against his back. Laughter stopped when he entered a room. The preacher's Sunday sermon spoke of sin wearing a friendly face. Bo knew who the lesson was meant for. He left early, his boots tracking dust through the aisle. Back home, he found Ayanna and Nita by the stream, washing clothes and singing softly in a language the wind seemed to understand. He sat nearby, pretending to mend a fence post, watching the way sunlight touched their faces. For a moment the world felt right again. But as the sun dipped low, Ayanna's smile faded. "You shouldn't keep us," she said that evening by the fire. "The town hates us. They'll hate you too." Nita nodded, her voice smaller. "We can leave tomorrow. We'll manage." Bo stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Rain threatened again, hanging in the clouds like doubt. "You stay," he said, "or I'll be alone again." His voice cracked on the last word. They didn't leave. The next dawn, hoofbeats thundered from the ridge. A crowd formed outside, faces Bo had known all his life, twisted now with something meaner than anger. The sheriff led them, hat low, eyes heavy with regret. "It's gone too far, Bo," he called. "You know what they're saying. You can't keep them. The town won't stand for it." Ayanna stepped behind Bo, clutching Nita's hand. Bo looked at them, their fear, their quiet dignity, and felt something inside him rise, slow but unshakable. He took a step forward. "You all think I'm shamed," he said. "Then let's give the town a story worth the telling." His voice carried through the wet air. "I'll marry them both. Today. Right here." The words cracked the crowd open like thunder. Gasps, mutters, curses. Someone laughed nervously, another spat in the mud. The preacher pushed through, red-faced. "This is madness, Bo. You can't," but Bo's gaze silenced him. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "You sure about this?" Bo nodded once. "Ain't about sure. It's about right." The preacher, cornered between duty and shame, finally lifted his Bible. The ceremony was short, awkward, and trembling. The rain began again, soft and steady, as if heaven itself was listening. When Bo said, "I do," the thunder answered, rolling down from the hills like applause. Ayanna's tears mixed with rain. Nita smiled for the first time in days. And when it was done, the townsfolk fell silent, not out of respect, but because no one knew what to say to a man who'd just rewritten the rules of decency by loving too loudly. That evening, Bo led his wives, his family, back to the cabin. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. He took his knife, pressed it into the wood of the door, and carved a heart large enough for all three of their names. Inside it, he wrote carefully, "Bo Ayanna Nita." The lantern light caught the carving, making it glow gold against the grain. Nita touched the heart with her fingers, whispering something in her native tongue. Ayanna leaned her head against Bo's arm. For the first time in years, he felt the ache in his chest quiet. They sat down to eat stew in silence, the kind that feels like peace. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, a new life began. The days that followed were slower, sweeter. The town still whispered, but the whispers couldn't cross the creek anymore. People looked away instead of shouting. The sheriff stopped riding out, and the preacher found another sermon to preach. Bo built them a porch swing, where Ayanna liked to watch sunsets, and Nita wove baskets that caught the light like honey. They planted a small garden, and laughter began to live in the cabin walls. Every morning, Bo kissed the carved heart on the door before heading out to the fields, as if to remind himself that love, once chosen, must be tended like land. Years passed like pages turning in a wind. The heart faded, the letters softening with weather, but never disappearing. Dust Hollow forgot its gossip, as towns always do when the next scandal comes along. The cabin grew older, but it stood strong against every storm. And Bo Maddox, once the giant cowboy who scared men and charmed horses, became just a man who had loved too bravely to bend. Some nights, long after his wives had gone to sleep, Bo sat on the porch watching the horizon. He'd hum one of Nita's songs, low and slow, until the stars felt close enough to touch. He'd think about the years he spent waiting for belonging and how it arrived not as he imagined, but as it was meant. Sometimes, he'd trace the scars on his hands and remember that love, real love, is built from quiet acts. A door opened on a rainy night, a blanket left between strangers, a name carved in wood. Now and then, a traveler passing through Dust Hollow might stop to ask about the cabin with the heart on its door. The locals would shrug, saying it belonged to some big old cowboy long ago who did something wild for love. But if you stood close enough, you could still see the carving glint in the dusk. The wood would whisper when the wind hit it right, telling of the man who chose kindness over comfort, defiance over silence. And if you listen long enough, you might hear his voice, soft as prairie wind, saying, "Love ain't what you say. It's what you carve into the world before it forgets you." Then the breeze would fade, carrying the story down the valley, a story of a giant cowboy, 2 women who found home in his heart, and a love strong enough to weather judgment and time itself. Even now, under that same wide western sky, the heart on the cabin door still shines.